Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel and welcome to the Magnus Carlsen Invitational Tournament in 2021. We're now in the round 2, and in the round 2 the most important game was the match game between Magnus Carlsen and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Maxime is of course the leader of the candidates tournament, so he has really some great opportunities to be maybe even the world championship challenger in the forthcoming world championship. It was, I think, a very important also moment when Maxime Vachier-Lagrave won a rapid match game against Magnus Carlsen in the tournament. So Maxime can really play. Maxime, an outstanding player. He also likes, I think, this rapid time formats because he's a sharp attacker. He likes to play the Nidors. He likes to play really the sharpest openings. Let's see now what happened, because this is now a different Magnus Carlsen. Magnus had some trouble in the past tournaments. He had some trouble in the rapid time formats. He had also trouble in the classical time formats, but from round 1 I think Magnus showed us that he's back. He won now the first game. If you have followed so far my coverage, he won the game against Jorden van Foreest with an outstanding performance. Let's check out now what happened in the round 2. It was really great game. So here Magnus goes really all in with the move c3, and it's the so-called Zaragoza opening, and the Zaragoza opening is of course not the best opening that you want to play from white's perspective, but still okay. You're playing a pawn move, still you can play d4 and then maybe knight to d2 and then maybe grab some spades with e4. Here Maxime goes b6. Also he's not battling for the center immediately, but actually he's battling already for the e4 square, so that's why Magnus goes e4 himself. We have bishop to b7 and now d3. Here Magnus Carlsen built, I think, a similar structure like in the Perch defense, but of course reversed. When you're playing the Perch, then you're playing d6, maybe c6, and then something like knight to f6. So the idea about this move d3 and e4 setup is to have a control of the e4 whenever black is trying to beat the center with the move d5. Still you can pass through with the move e5, and then knight to f3, queen to e2, getting some spaces here around the square e5 and getting also very nice space advantage on the 5th rank. That's actually the positional goal of white setup here. Of course, what black can do is challenge the center immediately with d5. e5 can really break the center immediately. In the game, Maxime goes e6. He's trying, of course, to play the move d5. Here we have knight to d2. Now comes the move d5. And now Magnus goes knight to f3. You see this flexible setup in the center. If now Maxime takes here d takes e4, then still we can play d takes e4. And of course, we will simply play, I don't know, maybe something like bishop to e2, castling, then maybe queen to c2. But the cool part is then the flexibility of this knight. This knight will play to c4, maybe to e3, even to g4. So this knight in the Perch defense, but as we said, it's a reverse Perch defense, having good control of the center. So here Maxime goes knight to f6. He's challenging now the pawn on e4, but Magnus goes e5. It becomes now, I think, sort of a King's Indian attack against the French defense. I've covered this line in one video. Of course, it was played in a different move order, but it's actually like a King's Indian attack against the French. And the good part now for Magnus is of course the space advantage. After e4 we have even the move d4. We are now cementing the center, and we have now the so-called directed attack. The directed pawn structure is of course this one. White is coordinating the attack towards the king side because the pawns are showing us of course the direction. Black is of course attacking the queen side with this d5. The d5 e6 setup is trying to get a c5 pawn breakthrough. Maybe Magnus could have hang on to this position also with queen to e2. It's also an opportunity. We don't have to play a pawn move, but then maybe black can get some space. c5, maybe even c4, d4 would be opportunities to break in the center. So here d4, Maxime breaks the position with the move c5. We have h4 because we said we have the directed attack. You don't want to lose time. It's time really to attack immediately that side where we are better, because we have now the space advantage on the king side. So it's time to push our pawn there. So knight to c6, Maxime attacks further the center, bishop to d3, c takes d, and now knight to b4, attacking the bishop. If you retreat, for instance, here to b1, it's not so good. Of course, you're staying here on a very long diagonal. You're attacking here the h7 square, but actually with bishop to a6, I think black has a decent game because first of all we're preventing some castlings. and also in some occasions you could see that white is securing the king on f1 and play simply king to g1 without castling, but so far it's not possible. You have to compete on the light squares. Here bishop to e2 play by Magnus, and now Maxime goes queen to c8. What Maxime Vachier-Lagrave is actually doing here, he's getting rid of his bad bishop. We have talked about this bad bishop situations in blocked pawn structure in many of my videos. So whenever you see black has many pawns on light squares in the center, so this bishop is a little bit blocked out by its own pawn. Here bishop's activity of the dark square bishop is perfectly fine, so we don't want to trade off the dark square bishop, but actually what we want to do from black's perspective is to get rid of our bad light square bishop. So here Magnus castles, bishop to a6, bishop takes queen to a6, knight to e1, very important move as pardon me. Okay, as here Maxime Vachier-Lagrave threatens to move knight to d3. This move is very dangerous because then you have of course a very powerful control of the light squares. The queen is then out of game. Here after move knight to e1, Maxime goes of course natural with rook to c8. He gets use of the only open file of the c file, and we have now h5. Again, a great move by Magnus Carlsen. He's now attacking further the king side. He's not losing any time, as we said. He's simply attacking further. Here bishop to e7, and now h3. Maybe a slightly better idea is to play simply h6. Continue our pressure, then g6, then knight to f3. Here simply after castling, we could then maneuver the knight maybe to h2 and then to g4, and even in some occasions we could actually cement this knight on f6, maybe with some positional trade of pieces with bishop to g5, then maybe trading of the bishop somehow, and trying to cement somehow the knight here on a very active square. So here bishop to e7, as we said, a3. Still, it's not a losing game, as I said, for Magnus. It's simply maybe a slightly worse continuation. Here knight to c6, and Magnus goes now queen to g4. Here Maxime finds a great counterattack, g5. If you take h takes g6 en passant, it's not good. Then of course h takes g6 will happen. Maybe you can maneuver the knight to f3, but here I like this idea, knight to b4. Then again with opportunities to play knight to d3. You cannot take of course the knight, your rook is hanging. So again, I think black would find great ways to cement simply the position around the square d3. Then maybe black doesn't have to even castle, can maneuver the king maybe somewhere, and maybe try somehow a rook to h5, maybe even doubling up somehow the rooks on the h file. This could be very dangerous, as Magnus cannot compete with the rooks on the h file. So here, as I said, taking en passant is not an option. Magnus simply proceeds with knight to f3. We have h6 cementing the position on the king side, and now bishop to e3. Here again, knight to h2, maybe slightly better, because we want in some occasions to play the move f4. f4 would be a breakthrough. So far it's not possible, but black would be forced maybe to play something like f5 after queen to d2, queen to d1 retreating, because if you don't want to take, of course, here with e takes f6 en passant, then knight to f6, and although you could maybe take here the pawn, here knight takes d4 is very dangerous, again with some ideas, knight to e2, then we can secure even the king with moves as king to f8. I don't think that in this position Maxime Vachier-Lagrave would castle, but as I said, this knight's activity is simply, I think, too much to handle here for white. So as I said, bishop to e3, maybe not the best of moves. As we said, knight to h2, maybe after f5 here, queen to d1, and then black can proceed with b5. Then we have to play b3, because b4 would be serious threat, but still we can pass through with the move a4. Okay, but still bishop to e3. Here Maxime goes queen to e2, attacks simply further the position, attacks the position on light squares. He got rid of the light square bishops, he got rid of his bad piece. Now he can attack simply the light squares further in the position. We have now b4 by Magnus, a very important move. This is very important. If you don't play this move b4, then a positional threat by black would be something like knight to a5, and then cement further the knight on c4. Again, we would simply attack the light squares in the position. I think that's the main issue here, the weak c4. If you then weaken, if you play b3 in order to prevent a still knight to e5 could happen, attacking the b3, and then if you try to protect it with the rook, then your a3 is weak. So these are the tiny little things on the queen side that Magnus has to solve. He has to play now the move b4. We have now knight to d8 and now queen to h3. Magnus gets now finally out of the range, because again this move f5 is a serious threat. Then after e takes f6 en passant, knight to f6 will again happen, and then you have to retreat with the queen. Then g4 I think would be a possibility, so it's a bad choice then for white. White has to retreat like Magnus did, queen to h3. We have now f5 by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave anyway, and now e takes f6 en passant. But you see now this move knight to f6 is not coming with the tempo. Now Magnus goes knight to e5, a very good move with opportunities to cement the knight further here on g6. And actually what Magnus did here is a sacrifice. Here after the move queen to h5, Magnus trades off the queens. Here queen to h5, knight to h5, and now knight to d3. What Magnus got here for the pawn is a very nice now setup in the center with this knight. This pawn on e6 is a backward pawn. I think the coordination of white's pieces is now much better. First of all, what we can notice after the move knight to d3, white has here again a rook connection. The rook connection is very important also stage in the chess game. Now we can simply compete on the c file and attack simply further the position with maybe something like b5, then a4, a5, getting used maybe also on the a file. So white has now suddenly the opportunities to attack. The pieces are of blacks, I think, a little bit uncoordinated. They have to be improved very fast in the game. Bishop to d6 played by Maxime. He's challenging the knight on e5. Rook from f to c1. We have trades of rooks, and now rook to h7, and Magnus goes now rook to c8. You see, when you don't have the rook connection, how bad a chess game can become. Now the rook is the best piece on the board. You cannot go with your king here to d7. The knight has taken that square. Even if you trade here bishop to e5, it's not such a powerful choice here. Again, knight to e5, we have another knight that can cover that square. So I'm really impressed by the game here by Magnus Carlsen. He played an outstanding pawn sacrifice just in order to get his pieces very active. So rook to c8, we have again trade off the rooks, because that's actually what black would love to do. Trade off the rooks and then going maybe into favorable endgame where we have an extra pawn. But Magnus goes now rook to a8. This rook is really dangerous. Here we have knight to f6 by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Maybe finally, as we said, maybe bishop to e5 would be at least some kind of a simplification. Knight to e5, maybe king to e7, but now knight to g4 is also very dangerous. You see, we have to attack this knight after knight to f7. Here we can actually even take knight takes h6, then knight takes h6 here, bishop to g5. It's a bad game here for black anyway, but as I said, you cannot defend this position. So here bishop to e5 is simply not a good choice. So here knight to f6, we have now a very monstrous move. It's such a beautiful move here by Magnus Carlsen. Incredible move. Bishop b5. What Magnus has prepared here, it's really brilliant, because this is a fast time format. We have to say it. We have to really give Magnus Carlsen here some credit. The move b5 is, I think, a top engine move. b5, because if you take bishop to a3, then you get really the monstrous Zugzwang position. You get so Zugzwanged here that you don't have actually with any piece to play. Here knight to c6 is the threat. You have to protect your knight. Then this knight comes into the game. Here after the move rook to d6, let's see this possible continuation. If you try to defend this, then you get Zugzwanged with the move bishop to d2. The problem is now this bishop cannot play. If you move it to b2, then you get bishop to b4. If you try here maybe knight to e4, let's see this continuation. Then again bishop to e1, and if you try to push the pawns in order to make something, then simply f3, and again bishop to d2, and again your Zugzwang, because if you try here g5 to pass through, then we can simply play bishop to g5, and you see the knight is hanging. So it's really incredible what Magnus has prepared here in a fast time format. I was really impressed when I saw this move. As I said, b5, you cannot take the pawn, and Magnus has now the opportunity to grab even some further space. This position for black is so bad. Black is really paralyzed here. King to e7 here by Maxime. We have knight to g6. If you try, of course, here king to f7, then we can simply take, and the problem is now also the bishop is hanging, so you cannot move the king here. Probably the best way is simply to play king to e8, but again, this idea, knight to e5, if you try to take knight to e5, here maybe knight to e4, but again, knight to c6, and if you try to defend, then we'll simply move our pawn here. If you try somewhere, I don't know, maybe to go bishop to d6, we can simply play f4 and simply attack here the position. Then this bishop will come into the game, and it's a bad game here again by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So it's really wild what and Magnus has prepared. Really great position understanding. After the move knight to g6, we have king to d7, again knight to e5, bishop to e5, knight to e5, and again bishop to d2. In this position, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave resigned because this bishop will come into the game. If you try something like, I don't know, king to e8, again bishop to b4, with ideas to play knight to c6, and the problem is now the knight is hanging, so we can then afterwards take probably this pawn. It's losing for black immediately. So incredible, immortal boa constrictor game played by Magnus Carlsen. I was really impressed, and he played the Zugzwang in game 2. He played also Zugzwang motif in the game 1 against Jorden van Foreest. This is really the positional beast. This is the Magnus Carlsen we know. Incredible game by the world champion. With the Zaragoza Open, he played c3. Really, I'm really impressed by the world champion, and he deserved now his 2 points out of these 2 games. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas by the world champion. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my previous analyzed games, also by Magnus Carlsen against Jorden van Foreest. And if you want to see maybe the opening that Magnus played in the first game, the hyper accelerated Dragon Sicilian defense, you can also check out my series, how to play this opening from Black's perspective. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.